Hello, everybody. Welcome to this For the Love of Art webinar. I'm Elisabeth Graham Christensen from Mobile Transport Denmark Fine Art. Thank you for being here with us today. I will present our group shortly before we begin today's webinar on Brexit. For the Love of Art is a group of dedicated people from the art industry working for or with museums, collection and logistics, came together to support and help each other during the COVID-19 pandemic. The group members are conservators, registrars, insurance consultants, and fine art handlers. Our goal is to share news and information in order to find solutions for the safe care and handling of our cultural heritage under these difficult times. This is a non-profit group, and I would like to encourage you to look at the website and our blog to find out more topics and current information in the situation in different countries. Now, today we have a webinar on the fine art sector dealing with Brexit, and John Robinette will be our moderator and guide us through it. So over to you, John.
Everybody hear me? I've got an echo in my situation here, so I don't know what I'm listening. I'm still hearing Elizabeth, so pardon me for a bit. So welcome everybody. We are, of course, with For the Love of Art, and before we get completely started, I want to encourage everybody to visit our website, fortheloveofart.info, and fortheloveofart.info for more regular information and updates on both this situation and any other shipping situation, especially anything affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that in mind, I want to introduce our first speaker today. It is Simon Dent. He's going to give us a definition of Brexit for anyone who's not currently familiar, and also just sort of refresh everyone's mind and so as to what the current situation is. Come on, Simon.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon to everybody, or good morning, good evening, wherever you are. So what is Brexit? The whole subject must seem very confusing to a non-European. It's confusing to anyone. Brexit means Brexit was the unhelpful answer given immediately after the referendum in 2016. The consequences and implications of the deal that was agreed before Christmas 2020 are only now becoming clear for different sectors in the UK economy as the details are put into practice. UK and European museums and supply chain companies who are directly affected by the changes are following the implications closely. However, some unexpected and wide-ranging consequences of the agreement for the cultural movement sector are just becoming apparent. Copyright and data protection law, work permits, phytosanitary standards, rules of origin, CITES licenses, known consignor security certificates, etc., are examples of areas of our business that will see changes in scope and volume. Brexit has been highly divisive and politicized, so it's not easy to describe it without falling into a disagreement. So in order to introduce what needs unraveling in this process, a very quick summary of what the past 50 years of European unification achieved may be helpful, as it can give an historical perspective on the depth and breadth of European convergence. So here goes. After the huge European collaboration during World War II, there were calls for a European customs union to facilitate the movement of goods. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome established the European Economic Community. The treaty was between 6 European countries: Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany, and proposed the creation of a single market without tariffs and common policies for agriculture, transport, and a European social fund. In 1973, after political debate on the implications for UK sovereignty, the UK joined the EEC, together with Ireland and Denmark. In 1993, the EEC changed its name to the European Union at the Maastricht Treaty, which marked the beginning of a new stage in the process of creating an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. This treaty opened up the union to 27 countries, created the freedom of movement for people and goods, as well as creating increased convergence in the areas of borders, foreign policy, policing, security, law, and trade standards in a common economic area of 447 million people. The challenge is comparable to the creation of a federation of states with its federal agencies, but without a common language. The structure was designed to create a level playing field for member states in all these areas of activity. The Lisbon Treaty in 2009 brought new lawmaking powers to the European Parliament in the areas of agriculture, justice, commercial policy, and implementing the acts of the European Parliament. In 2016, in a public referendum held during a human migration crisis in Europe, the UK voted to leave the European Union with 52% of the votes in a simple remain or leave plebiscite. The leaving date was delayed twice and eventually fixed at the 31st of December 2020. And during the last 4 years, 2 UK governments and the European Union have been in negotiations to arrive at a bespoke agreement that allows continuation of certain benefits of the single market whilst giving freedom from certain obligations. The reality of how this new agreement unravels 50 years of convergence in trade and affects our cultural logistics sector with the European Union is becoming clear as it impacts on border procedures, industry standards, and the freedom of people to move and to work in the European Union and the UK, all of which demand new government systems and procedures to manage the huge increase in volume of workload. For example, UK customs authorities now expect some 215 million additional customs entries each year, but the new customs facilities for controls have not been built near ports yet. Some trade sectors have been particularly affected due to additional border controls and ensuing delays, for example, fisheries and agricultural exporters, whilst others, like the music industry and universities, are affected more by the restrictions and the movements of people. Some UK export sectors say these are just teething problems, whilst others say the agreement is unworkable for them. Our very versatile and multifaceted sector seems well prepared for the shifts in scope and volume of procedures and regulations, but what is happening on the ground? On that crucial question, I will pass the discussion on to my colleagues in the forum who will explain what they can of the impact they are seeing on cultural movement and how those issues are being addressed. Please note that the panel are not speaking as official representatives, but they're sharing professional advice based on their knowledge and experience. For current UK government advice, you can find a downloadable document on the website of For the Love of Art that contains links for guidance on moving goods between the UK and the European Union from the 1st of January 2021. So with the disclaimer done, it is over to Francesco Donadio, who will talk about the impact on shipping.
Thank you very much, Simon, and hello, everyone. First of all, I wanted to say I'm stepping in for Paul, who for business reasons could not take part today. And apologies if I'm not looking straight at the camera all the time. I have some notes on another screen. So what I've done, I've prepared a 15-minute presentation on the impact of Brexit on shipping. First of all, the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to give you a quick background on what we had to do as a company leading up to Brexit. Then I will talk about the impact on shipping. I will also give you an example of what we have to do for road freight from London to Paris using the Eurotunnel. And I will touch on CITES, export licenses, aviation security, and before a final summary, I will look at some issues and considerations. So, Brexit, who would have said? Since the referendum in 2016, I think we've all been preparing mentally and operationally for the 1st of January 2021. But I must say, there is nothing like the real thing. Being such an unprecedented event, perhaps many of us didn't know or think we had to negotiate a deal or how long it would take. But I must say, as Simon mentioned, in the end, it was a massive relief when the deal was reached before Christmas. This meant that from a compliance point of view, we didn't have to make as many changes as we had feared if we had left without a deal. For instance, we can still use the same driving licenses, and the international operator license, vehicle permits, and insurance policies only had to have minor adjustments. Nevertheless, a lot of support work and planning had to be done in the leading up to Brexit. And I just wanted to give a very brief account of the main things we had to do as a company. We had to make sure we had adequate staffing levels within our customs team, as well as backup customs agents at various UK ports. We had to deliver a lot of additional customs training within the team. We, of course, attended the numerous seminars and meetings on Brexit and went through tons of regulations and guidance. We increased our transit guarantee. We can now cover up to 700 million worth of value. And most of all, we had to make sure all the internal procedures, processes, and customs software systems were robust enough to cope with increased workload. So let's have a look now at the impact on shipping, Brexit on shipping. Well, like Simon mentioned, the main implications of Brexit are increased number of custom clearances, and with that, a lot more administration and inevitably additional costs. The main reason for this, as we all know, for every single movement in and out of the EU, we now have to do a customs clearance, as opposed to Brexit, where customs clearances, as opposed to pre-Brexit, where customs clearances only had to be done for, I would say, approximately 30% of the shipments. And those were shipments to Switzerland, Norway, and non-EU works moving within the EU under customs control. There are also more checks in transit and at borders, particularly on arrival at the first or last port of entry, exit to and from the EU, where we find checks on freight, paperwork, and passports. The good news is that so far things have gone pretty well. In the first 4 weeks of January now, we had an average of 2 or 3 trucks per week going to Europe, and we have used various crossings, the Eurotunnel from Folkestone to Calais, as well as the ferry services from Harwich to Hook and Portsmouth to Le Havre. So before the end of the transition period, there was some concern, as we all probably remember, over delays. So initially, we took essential bookings only in agreement with museums and galleries for January and February. We were very keen to test the system, so to get a better understanding sooner rather than later of what was going to happen. And as I said, so far, all the transport have taken place without incidents or delays. And I think this is credited to the fact that fine art agents, again, as Simon mentioned, they've been very well prepared, and we are used to transit documents and customs procedures, as during pre-Brexit, we had to do them for a proportion of shipments, as I said before. It must be said, though, that particularly in the first 3 weeks of January, we experienced a very low level of traffic because of the UK national lockdown, stockpiling before Christmas that took place, and also uncertainty and worries over the introduction of new Brexit procedures kept many general hauliers away from the UK at the very beginning of January. Statistically, I've read that we are approximately 1/3 down compared to the same time last year. Therefore, the situation will need to be monitored in the coming weeks and months as volume increases. In addition to that, we have the COVID testing, which is also compounded this further. Now, with regards to aviation security, the United Kingdom non-consignors and regulated agents secure cargo status is no longer recognized in the EU for road freight to Europe. And that will have an impact on freighter shipments from the main European hubs in Amsterdam, Brussels, Liège, and Luxembourg, where cargo will have to be rescreened. Air freight within the EU, in the UK, we used to deliver, to the airline 4 hours before departure for an air freight shipment. We now, with customs, we have to deliver a little bit earlier. So we're looking at 6 hours to allow for customs and then palletization. There's also been some changes to the export licenses and CITES. CITES, first of all, essentially, we need to apply for a CITES permit for any CITES item traveling to Europe. The DEFRA in the UK, they've changed the form slightly. They virtually just removed the EU logo, but it's pretty much the same form. It's worth noting that in pre-COVID times, an application would take around 2 or 3 weeks. Since COVID, DEFRA have advised that it could take up to 3 months. So that is to bear in mind in case you have a CITES shipment. Also, CITES for Brexit, we have to use certain ports. So there are specifically indicated in the government website, there are specific inland clearance facilities. For example, when using the Eurotunnel for imports, the truck will have to report to a place near Ashford, and for export in Ebbsfleet, which is in Kent. With regards to export licenses, prior to Brexit, there were 2 types of licenses: an EU license for works leaving the EU and a UK license for works leaving the UK, but remaining in the EU. There were also different value thresholds for different applications and category of items. Post-Brexit, there is no longer an EU license, only a UK license valid for all destinations in the world. The UK application form has been redesigned and new value thresholds have been published. The application process remains the same as pre-Brexit. On the license, we do have some good news. First of all, the Arts Council have managed to secure some funding, which means that from the autumn of 2021, they're expecting all licenses to be digitally completed, the license application forms. And the government has also put in place an electronic inland pre-clearance procedure, which means that in pre-Brexit times, we had to produce the export license down to the port to be presented and physically stamped. And it was quite a lengthy process. It would take a truck to clear anything from 2 to 6 hours. With the new system, the licenses are now uploaded and sent electronically with the entry to the customs hub in Salford. And I'm pleased to say that we have now completed a number of entries with licenses, and we received clearances within an hour for 80% of them and 2 hours for the rest with no issues or queries. National Museum can still use the open individual export license, which for loans they can export for up to 3 years. And also for crates, it's important to know that post-Brexit, all wooden packaging must be ISPM 15 compliant with a stamp to prove it. Now, so I was going to break down very briefly an example of what we had to do now for an export road freight from, say, London to Paris using the Eurotunnel. So the main thing is to, obviously, we need to complete an export declaration and raise a T document, a transit document in the UK. We usually start prepping the entry 2 or 3 days in advance, so we can resolve any issues which may arise on the customs system in good time. And when the shipment is ready to go, we simply submit the entry for approval. In order to complete the export declaration, we of course work with consignors to make sure they have all the, we have together all the required information, which is mainly a valid Eori number. We make sure, we have a shipping proforma invoice, with a full description of each artwork, the reason for export import, and in addition to the usual information about the work, title, artist, date, medium, value, we are also encouraging consignors to help us to provide net and gross weights, which very often we have to take a good guess, but they're needed for the entries. It's also important to indicate if the items contain any restricted materials, i.e. CITES and dangerous goods. Constantine, we have a customs warehouse, and in most circumstances, the export declaration and T document are raised at the authorized warehouse, so there is no need to stop at the borders. The items must be physically at our warehouse for that, so it means that if a consignment is coming from a UK museum, the vehicle can be loaded at the museum, but must come to the warehouse for clearance before proceeding to the port of exit. Customs clearance could take as little as 30 minutes or a bit longer if there is a UK license, as I explained earlier. Once export declaration is completed for the road freight, we need to complete and submit a number of port passes or permits. And for the Eurotunnel in particular, they vary from port to port, but for the Eurotunnel, we have to submit a Eurotunnel border pass as well as the Kent access permit. And as a company, we found it easier to book the vehicle now on the Eurotunnel in advance. Before, we used to turn up and drive on under our account without a booking as such, using automatic number plate recognition. But now, booking the trip in advance, we find it facilitates things, as the vehicle number plate is then linked to all the required port and border formalities, and we can pre-lodge all the customs information, including in the industry, you will have heard of the MRN number, which is the Customs Movement Reference Number, which is found on the customs paperwork. So this is quite important, and it's a number with a barcode, which is scanned by officials at the port of exit and tells the system we have a valid customs declaration. In terms of the transit, as I said, we don't need to stop, for customs at the border because we have a authorized, warehouse. But when we get to Folkestone, obviously there are, the boarding and check-in procedures are pretty much, the same. Main differences is that there are some additional checks as you go through. And after ticket barrier, UK authorities will scan the vehicle number plate to check all the information is on the system. And then the French and UK authorities will check again paperwork and passports. On arrival in Calais, the vehicle could be stopped by customs, as this is the first port of entry to the EU. And there is a traffic light system, I'm told, with an LED screen. So if the vehicle is shown green, they can proceed without stopping. But if they require a check, the vehicle will be diverted into an orange-red lane for a customs inspection and check of paperwork. Once clear the place, we can then proceed to the final destination in Paris, in this case for discharge. In the orange lane, we've been stopped a few times. We spent a maximum of an hour, but the average was 20, 30 minutes. And it was mainly for paperwork. And sometimes they have opened the track to check the number of pieces. But overall, most of the drivers have reported a very quite, flowing quite well. And also quite funny in a way, one of the drivers told me the other day that he found French officials to be much more friendly in post-Brexit than pre-Brexit. So that's a plus. Now, I'm almost finished, and I just wanted to look at some other issues and consideration. As I said, most drivers are reported the system flows very well. It's provided the paperwork is correct. Obviously, and as I said before, as agent we are quite used to this process, so we can get things right. It's just the sheer amount of volume that it's obviously has increased. And as also Simon, I think, mentioned, the customs system is very old. It was supposed to be updated. They've delayed the new system to be launched until possibly later on this year. So the current system, can be slow at times, because it gets overloaded, by the entries. There's also been some confusion and wrong information given in the guidance, and also officers on the ground not understanding the rules. I think, if I may say, there was a Spanish track from SIT that they didn't realize that a transit document meant that the vehicle could come to our warehouse for clearance. They were expecting the clearance to be done at the port of arrival. So it was completely a customs misunderstanding. So there is a little bit of confusion also on the ground. And drivers have also reported that a lot of the time they're stopping a lot at the moment because they want to get trained themselves. So it's they're using the several stops to train their own staff. As I said, our customs team is now working really 24/7 with increased volumes, and particularly with the truck arrival times when using the long ferry crossing. So in general, there is an added traveling time for a typical journey, particularly and also for the COVID testing that we are experiencing at the moment. So logistically, it's making life quite complicated, because we have to get the test before we can go down to the port, and then obviously the customs clearance, adds a little bit of time. There are additional costs, no doubt. The journeys are going to be a little bit longer, particularly when using ferry crossing to avoid the short straits. There are customs declaration fees, transit guarantees fees. Although the transit guarantee fee will vary from country to country, public museums in most countries, including Italy and Spain, have exemptions. So the advice is to call and check with the agent. In summary, I think there is a sense that there is flowing well, but there is still a little bit of work in progress in some areas. Customs are making changes to procedures as we go along. And we also understand that UK and the EU have agreed to cooperate and engage in further discussion to finalize various aspects of the deal. And also we need to test the system when the volume of traffic returns to normal level. There was last week, we noticed an increase. So the first 3 weeks were very quiet. Last week, the last week of January, there was a little bit more traffic at the tunnel, but nothing to do with Brexit hold up. It was just a general increase in traffic. So the system is still coping quite well. So I think so far so good, and that's all for me.
Thank you, Francesco. Really appreciate that. That was a huge amount of information with a lot of detail. So I'm wondering if there is a place where our listeners can find any of this information. Is this all on the UK government website, or is there a reference that we can provide?
Yes, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I could share, what I've prepared, possibly, and maybe I edit a little bit my presentation, and I can give you, and then I can maybe add, some links to where, further information can be sought.
Maybe we can publish this on the For the Love of Art website. That would be perhaps ideal. So we'll, see if we can't work something out with that. So stay tuned. If you're not already signed up for the notifications on the website, please do. Also, there's some activity in the chat, so everyone please sign into your Google account and put your questions in the chat so that we can answer them. We're going to have questions at the end. So for the next portion, we're going to talk with David Packer from the UK Registrars Group about some of the changes to the risk assessments in our institutions. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you for the presentation so far. I can go a little bit lighter on detail. I'm happy to do that. I would say that in parallel with some of Francesco's comments as well, that the experience for us in the UK museum sector, or the European museum sector, has followed the same kind of trajectory in the last 4 years in grappling with the complexities and the journey, I suppose, to this point. But I think I can probably add a little bit more reflection in some other areas. So it's fair to say, I think, that in Europe, Brexit's not been far from our thoughts, and at various times occupying them far more than the usual span of the working day for a good 4 years now. At the start of this process, the Department for Culture and Arts Council England began a series of workshops with representatives across the cultural and creative arts sectors to try to distill our key desires, I suppose, from the outcome of the departure and what we would need in any possible trade deal. At that point, I think we knew two things. One, that the process would be complicated and difficult, and that not all that we would want would be present in a post-Brexit relationship. As we are part of a much larger picture, and we could easily be drowned out by other sectors in the clamour around any last-minute agreement, for example. Number two, there would always be a very real possibility of no deal at all, and this was clear in the direction of a lot of the conversations at the European Registrars Conference in London in 2018, and therefore we would have to maintain contingency planning for this right to the last moment. The situation as it stands contains some features that we knew about and worked towards as part of that contingency planning. I think, as Francesco has already said, that there were elements of that framework already in place in the approach to the final trade deal, and some other elements from other government agencies, for example, were put into place. So at least gave us a little bit of clarity in the run-up to the end game, I suppose, immediately before Christmas. So we knew that post-Brexit transport would require customs declarations of some form. We could feel reasonably confident in this, as we work with agents who make all those kinds of declarations routinely for us for transport outside the EU. And as I said, agents and some government agencies were already making moves for this, with major changes to the submission and approval model, although, as Francesco just pointed out, the HMRC Revenue and Customs system is not yet up and running. That was being talked about at that early stage, that the part of that process and move over to the online submission could and would contribute to the post-Brexit scenario. Most likely that art on loan would go tariff-free. We knew about the staged rollout of customs controls to an extent, that cultural export licensing would change, and as well as CITES processing. The points-based immigration model rolled out by the Home Office before the end of 2020. So we could see, at least to some degree, how that would develop for incoming couriers to the UK and potential future colleagues and people who we would need to continue to recruit from across European countries for very specific and highly skilled roles. And in fact, this situation of a growing appreciation of the roughly what the framework might look like at the far side of it was reflected from our European colleagues, both in museums and in transport agents. And in fact, we found many were extremely well briefed from their own government agencies as well. So we had done what we could, I suppose, with the situation as we understood it, and now we waited to see. The main concern, I would say, therefore shifted from the process of making declarations, say, to the physical problems likely at the ports that would delay our shipments and pose a conservation and security risk if vehicles were held for extended periods in lorry parks. And of course, nobody was especially reassured by the situation that developed immediately over the Christmas period, with the short notice shutdown of the borders in response to the COVID crisis, and how the process would work when we came to sending couriers into Europe in the future from the UK. The outcome we have means not only that those concerns have not abated wholly, but elements of what we did fear initially are coming about. The effects of a late and broad brush agreement on elements of what we do, let's say. So specific situations we face in the cultural sector were not addressed, I think as we feared at point one, or the implications are still being worked out. Examples might be the restriction that UK hauliers face in the number of drops they can do on a single trip, hence the immediate impact on touring musicians that probably quite a number of the audience have heard a great deal about, because it is extremely serious for them. But could also impact upon consolidated collections of art and therefore cost. I believe that previously non-commercial moves of art for exhibitions were exempt from these regulations, but now they are not. So this is a detail, I suppose, of an outcome of a broad brush agreement that has a very immediate impact on a specific area of what we do. And I think more and more these are starting to emerge, and now we have to grapple with how we're going to address them. So similarly, the shape of checks on movements between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, not just between UK and European Union countries, how the rules of origin may impact or not upon the preparation of cultural materials, and therefore maintaining its tariff-free status. Not necessarily for the costs involved, which might be nominal, we would hope, but because of the uncertainty. The possibility of a check to the smooth, predictable and timely course of the planned journey is the real concern there. It is a grey area around the application of those rules that might lead to a truck with its load and crew waved into the orange or red lane, there to be released after who knows how many hours. So when it comes to the discussion of institutional risk assessments, it does distill down to the critical areas understood by registrars in making their plans and being confident in managing the risks: timescale, clarity, and control. So we had little time really between the details of the agreement emerging and going into practice. And therefore, as we're finding, both customs officials on both sides of the import-export barriers are at this point learning on the job, as are we, and trying to apply the rules. And the other part of that, the clarity, therefore, is that there still remains this lack of clarity of the effects of some of the agreement's provisions and how rigorously or consistently these are being applied or will continue to be applied. So we can say that the current situation, therefore, upsets our ability to apply end-to-end control to mitigate risk, because there are more blind spots than we would like at the moment, and we have to do it tomorrow or next week. Complexities and lacunae in the regulations all threaten this model to an extent. So yes, we would perceive that lending and borrowing at the moment is a riskier undertaking than before. And we have made Arts Council and DCMS aware potentially of this viewpoint that has it might impact, for example, upon the application of government indemnity scheme cover. Although perhaps a bigger actual risk to our activities over time will be in the longer in-depth application, or how the ongoing relationships settle, and therefore areas such as an escalation of costs, and whether that means a scaling back or a modification of the kind of ambition that we've seen up until this point in terms of lending and borrowing and touring exhibitions. As always, though, there are some mitigating factors that can help. So one area of exploration, and again, Francesco touched upon this, about the necessity for moving shipments to the warehouse to complete the pre-movement processing. What would it mean if individual museums became approved economic operators, let's say, from July? Would that simplify some of those processes? Would that help with the process in actually making that, or restoring some of the predictability to the actual transit process on departure or on return to the UK? But we do need some sector-specific guidance on identifying problem areas quite soon, and we're quite hopeful that we'll be able to get that. And I think it's also reassuring to hear from Francesco that that officials on both sides are actually still committed to continuing these discussions. We do still want to be at the table to work out some of the technical issues with the EU partners. I have no doubt we'll work them out, but in the meantime, it might feel rather uncomfortable for a while. I suppose the other element is that actually the longer term, it's the depth of the change also. This is the other thing to be working through if we're considering risk mitigation in the future. In the first workshop I attended with the Arts Council, I confess I was a little bit worried that there was not a general discussion even about how we thought our working and relationships in Europe might develop through the process itself and well into the far side of it, where we'd want to be in 5 or even 10 years' time. It's understandable because there's a huge amount of ground to cover before then, but perhaps it does inform the current situation. Each short-term demand of the process itself and the ever-changing process itself has reduced focus on a vision of post-Brexit relations, perhaps. Perhaps progress now, we could probably do with approaching some of the outstanding problems with a developing idea of where we want to be in 5 years, post-Brexit and post-pandemic.
Great, thank you, David. Some really good information there. So we're going to keep going here so that we can get everyone speaking and have time for questions. So next we have Jen Kaines from the Royal Armoury is going to bring in some more information about the impact on other aspects that we haven't already talked about: intellectual property rights, funding programs in the UK, etc. So Jen, welcome.
Sorry, thank you everyone. My mute button's a bit slow to respond today. Along with many other aspects of life, the way that we manage intellectual property changed overnight as the UK left the EU. As Simon mentioned in his introduction, we are not legal experts in this area, but we're basing our presentations on best information to date from UK government. And in this instance, much of this information has come from the UK Intellectual Property Office websites. And this is correct as of January 2021. So the UK itself is a signatory to the international treaties in its own right on intellectual property, so such as the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literacy and Artistic Works. The present exit agreement maintains the current levels of intellectual property protection, with the UK enshrining as UK law the sentiments of the EU law. At present, it looks like copyright and artistic resale rights will remain the same. EU trademarks no longer include UK items. The UK are putting in place a system to provide an alternative and ensure all current arrangements are effectively continuing, but they would be challengeable separately. The UK has promised to add international trademarks to UK law. However, there are currently no cross-border arrangements, no reciprocal protection for database rights, or the orphan works exceptions. The European patent system sits outside the EU and therefore continues as before. So that kind of really covers where we are at present with intellectual property. Moving on to data protection, currently the exit agreement does not cover personal data flow between the UK and the EU. However, a bridging agreement has been put in place for the next 6 months while the EU Commission assesses UK data laws. To clarify, personal data is any information that can be used to identify a living person. So that will include names, delivery details, IP addresses, membership lists, images of people, and potentially information on collection items. So the UK has replaced the EU GDPR directive with a UK GDPR law, which sits alongside the UK Data Protection Act 2018. Having left the EU Commission, the UK is now classed as a third country under EU legislation and is currently undergoing what is referred to as an adequacy assessment, to make sure that it has all the laws, rules and regulations in place to ensure compliant data transfer. If the UK does not get adequacy, there will be more procedures to ensure compliance when sending data. So practically, what does this mean to us in the cultural sector? Well, in the next 6 months during the bridging agreement, nothing substantially changes. However, both sides are currently advocating as a sensible precaution that we should all analyse who and where you send and transfer personal data to and from, and to put in place alternative transfer mechanisms, such as the use of standard contractual clauses to safeguard against any interruption to the free flow of data. That being said, standard contractual clauses need to be reviewed to ensure that they are robust. This is not just due to the UK exiting the EU, but also following the Schrems II ruling. It is essential to review and understand where, how, and who you are transferring data to and from. In terms of dispute resolution, note that the EU-UK exit agreement does not detail cross-border civil litigation. The UK is waiting to find out whether it can still benefit from the Lugano Convention and the recast Brussels regulation relating to jurisdiction and enforcement. At present, the advice from UK lawyers is to review current contracts, and if there isn't one, to insert an exclusive jurisdiction clause, as most courts are likely to respect that. Without a decision or such a clause, decision on jurisdiction and enforcement of disputes will fall to domestic law and could result in difficulties trying to enforce judgments. Finally, I'm just going to cover a little bit about EU funding programmes. So the UK will continue to participate in the current agreed funding programmes until the end of those agreed funding agreements for those programmes. There are some programmes under the next EU spending framework that the UK will still be participating in, and UK institutions are very much open to partnership working across the EU and beyond. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. So now we're going to go to questions that we're receiving from the live chat. I'll remind everybody that our panel here, outside of just the speakers, they've also been dealing with shipments from Europe into the UK and back and forth. So, if you have specific questions about their experiences, please feel free to ask. The first question that we're going to address comes from Cristina Marciliano. I'm sorry if I don't speak Italian. Question on shipping. From an insurance standpoint, we have run into issues, especially in France, with certificates of insurance not being accepted unless a French insurer issues. Is that, and the question is, why is that the case? Does anyone have an answer for that question? Just when I thought that the issue turned everyone into a lawyer about legal issues, and
it looks very strange because we are using in many other countries insurance certificates from out of Europe, so European community. So I don't understand why. It's very strange.
Perhaps this is an issue that the French agent can address. I know we have other agents listening online. Perhaps they can also chime in with an answer. Next question we had, are the customs checks that are happening at Calais random? Are art shipments fast-tracked by any chance?
I can relate at least one anecdotal, I suppose, which is that one of the other agents reported to me that in the first couple of weeks, I think afterwards, they had 2 or 3 of their UK number plated trucks checked by Belgian police at the roadside effectively. So yeah, I think as Francesca was saying, I think we are probably seeing an increase in those random checks as well, because partly it might well be to to give a first boost, I guess, to compliance, and secondly, to see what the sort of level of compliance and what kind of problems might be arising with the paperwork, for example. So a sort of semi-training approach. But I think this is it. It's still anecdotal, and we hope in the events that we've got coming up in the next couple of weeks that we'll actually start to get a bit more together, a little bit more systematic about what we know about how the checks are developing, especially as in the first couple of weeks in January in particular, everybody held off from running shipments in that period, just as a safety measure, really.
Right. I assume everybody was waiting to see how the dust would settle. Anyone else want to respond to that or speak to that?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to come in with the speaker. Yeah, I had the difficulties. Yeah, no, I think the answer is they're very much, random checks. And I think, as I said, in the first few weeks in January, they're using them, a little bit of a training exercise, from their point of view. They've got a lot of, new staff, working at the borders. So they're trying to, get as much experience as they can themselves. So yes, they're random, and at the moment they're up. Sometimes, we can also go through quite quickly with the green light. Yeah.
And there's no special treatment for art and artifacts and that.
I'm afraid not. No.
Okay. Another question that we have from Shelley Threadgill: could you address screening procedures when shipments are departing from Luxembourg, France, or Brussels?
Well, again, it varies. I think maybe Marco, if I can bring you in a bit. What we understand is that in Brussels, Amsterdam, and Liège, sniffer dogs can be arranged, so it's very non-intrusive, way of screening. And some of the airlines, they're still asking us to produce a regulated agent certificate, even if they're not recognized, to avoid extra charges. So they're giving agent in the UK a sort of a temporary a waiver, on charges for screening if you provide a certificate. So it's the way I understand it is sniffer dogs in Brussels, Liège, and Amsterdam. In Cargolax, Luxembourg, there are they don't have sniffer dogs, so it will have to be either X-rayed or the ETD, which is the explosive trace detection, which means swabbing the inside of the crate as you do as a passenger. When you go through, we probably forgot what it's like, traveling, but when you go through the security checks at the airport, they do the swab of your bags, and it's the same, with the case. If Marco wanted to add on that, if you had any experiences.
No, that's exactly how you said, Francesco. The sniffers dogs are a viable option, and it's quite easy, non-invasive. It's very easy and fast to arrange. It's not particularly expensive, so that is actually a very good option for Amsterdam and Brussels.
Great, thank you. Another question from Jorge Balmaceda. One question for Constantine and for French agents. Advise on what overnight contingency plans you would be able to employ in the event that vehicles are delayed at ports due to Brexit problems.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. In terms of on the UK side, obviously we are only about 60 miles away from Folkestone and Dover, so we can easily return, to depot if there was a delay. At the other on the French side, I would think that Brussels and Paris are probably the nearest, locations with a fine art store, where we can go to. So I'm not sure if anybody else wanted to come in on that in terms of suggestions?
Oh, I think you are right, Francesco, but I don't see real a problem. I mean, crossing border like Switzerland, I mean, if everything is prepared, is quite easy. Like it is happening now with UK. I mean, we had all of us, we had the trucks already going to and coming back from UK with no special delays, maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, but I don't see really problems due to Brexit that can cause problem in crossing the borders. I mean, it's something that is happening in international transportation anyway, so I don't see this being a problem.
Yes,
Okay,
no, you're right, Antonio. It has not happened at all, and it normally happens when there is, you know, a strike or, you know, a particular protest, you know, at the border. So we have not seen the level of disruption.
Yes, not due to Brexit, as you say.
Not due to Brexit, yeah.
As we all know, there was a huge problem at the end of December, but that was not caused by Brexit. It was caused by closing borders because of COVID. And that was another story that can happen between any country, even without custom problems.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have several more questions. Maybe this is a quick one. What's the effect on couriers?
What couriers? At the moment, yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned, the Home Office guidelines that came out, so the UK Home Office, who have responsibility for immigration and visas to the UK, and they had made an undertaking that business travel from the European Union into the UK would be possible visa-free under certain categories of activity. One of those happened to be specified as site visits and inspections, which for us, and I checked this with the Home Office as well, will fit the bill for incoming courier. The issue that relates to couriers, and when we eventually start to send some back, is that the individual member states in the European Union may have differing approaches to what is a permitted short business activity to enable the courier to travel visa-free. And it will mean that basically that's subject to a check. So we'll have to just confirm to make sure that couriers that we're sending there are, you know, if they're going to Germany, to make sure that in that particular area that they are, what they're proposing to do is an approved activity to travel there as a visa-free business traveller. I believe there are going to be, there's a limit overall, although we should not, for short-term business courier travel, necessarily breach those limits in terms of the total amount of time in any previous period that you spend in the European Union. And there may be other safeguards that you'll have to look out for to make sure that you have things like 6 months still valid on your passport. In some ways not dissimilar to let's say, that some of the precautions that you would take in sending a courier to North America, to the United States.
And relatedly, there's another question about UK citizens going into the EU. Do you require a visa to work, being paid for by a European institution?
It depends on the status of the work and what you're doing, the activity of it. So, I mean, if you're a simple short haul accompanying courier to see something done, you remain an employee of the lending institution. So you're an employee of a UK institution. It's a short business trip, and that, in that sense, is relatively straightforward. Where it's particularly impacting upon areas of the performance arts industry is that it gets much more complicated if you go there for a longer period of time. If you go there as a residency, performing artists or visual artists as a residency, and any other number of other activities around that kind of thing, that might mean a longer stay, that might mean that you are being paid or funded from a different source other than by a UK employer. And that's where it starts getting really complicated for people who, you know, for touring orchestras and things like that. Or especially if one particular issue that was highlighted, that if you are booked to perform and you are perhaps as a soloist, for example, then you might need to go across and actually stand in for a period of time for another performer who is unwell or has another engagement or something like that. And those kind of things, that all of the flexibility has been taken out of the process for orchestras and performing arts organizations around activities like that. Couriers, though, I would think that it is a bit more straightforward, but the issue is that member state by member state, you just have to be clear, you have to check that that courier with that passport that they hold is able to carry out that work, as long as they're an employee of you as the lending institution.
Got it. Thanks so much. Okay, so this chat's pretty lively. So we're about at the hour mark. So if everybody can stay with us, we can get to more of these questions. So a couple questions from Rocío for Jen, actually. So in EU countries, EU law is imbibed into national law. Therefore, resolution of litigation is under EU law. If the UK impose their own law for dispute resolution, it may jeopardize loans. There's sort of a follow-up. Another thought: changing all contracts to add these new litigation clauses, etc., means having access to legal experts and costs to get their assessment. Can you comment on that? Do you need to read?
Okay. I think the difficulty is that this is not necessarily anything to do with Brexit. This is due to the latest ruling, as I understand it, in the kind of Schrems 2 ruling around standard contractual clauses. So yeah, I'm not a lawyer. Absolutely, we need to all look at our standard contractual clauses, especially in terms of dispute resolution, but also in terms of data transfer. And I don't have any answers, but you're right, it's difficult. And I don't know what that impact is on all our loan agreements. I mean, we're all going to have to go back and have a look at all our loan agreements and make sure that there is something there that we can all, the problem is that we'll want it in UK legislation, in UK law, if there's a dispute, and if I'm lending something, the borrower is going to want it in their legislation jurisdiction. So yeah, there's going to be a bit of toing and froing, I think, as this all kind of pans out. But this is another unforeseen implication that we hadn't really thought about yet.
Gotcha.
That answers the question, but that's kind of the best I can do.
It sometimes comes up as an issue, or did come up before as an issue, sometimes with loans to North America, that some institutions didn't necessarily like issued loan agreements being governed by English law. And it's sort of the interaction between the operation of the contract of the loan agreement as opposed to other elements that might be operating under local jurisdiction. So if you were lending out under the conditions of from a UK institution under English law, but an insurance policy and other elements around the processing of that entire project is under the jurisdiction of New York law or whatever, then it's where they interact is where the difficulties can arise and where you can end up in discussions. But I don't, in some respects though, I suppose defining an area of jurisdiction in any contract is not necessarily a bad thing, given that, thankfully, for the most part, if we're talking about lending and borrowing between institutions, we don't often get to the point where we are slugging things out in a formal arbitration or dispute resolution setting. So what I'm saying is, yes, it's good to have the definition, but then as in the operation of all of our contracts, then there is a large dose of trust and goodwill that actually goes in with the practical application and operation of those contracts.
As you mentioned, David, is this an area that's going to get further clarified as time goes on?
Yeah, and I would think that particularly in areas around data as well. I think that's probably the next big milestone, I guess, with the UK data adequacy milestone next, and how that will operate back into other types of contracts.
At the moment, the Intellectual Property Office is saying that they are quite confident, I think was the phrase they used. They're quite confident that we will get an agreement. What that means in practice, I don't know, but we're hoping of quite confident.
Very good. That sounds positive. Okay, so another couple questions here. For transport companies, is it mandatory to be registered at the Goods Vehicle Movement Service?
Okay, I think at the moment it's not required on the way out of the UK, but is required on the way in until at least June or July, I believe. So I think that's the answer in a simple way.
And what happens in June or July?
Well, I think they will introduce it also for from the UK to Europe, but at the moment I think they are concentrating more. Yes, they're concentrating more on the way, one way. Yeah.
Okay, another question for the transporters. Is it mandatory to have an EORI number in the UK?
Well, that was yes. I mean, okay, as a UK entity, yes, you have to have obviously a UK registered Eori number, which is the international VAT number for trade. Now there was some talk that we had to apply possibly for a European Eori number to do the entries and trade. But and we applied for one for France, but it didn't seem to be the case. It didn't seem to be the case that we actually needed to one to complete export declarations. In the end, we didn't have to use it. So again, I think there's been a lot of, as I said in my talk, a lot of guidance, which was misleading, and it's been sort of adjusted as we go along. So no, we don't believe one is required to do the job we do.
Great, thanks. So one last question here from the chat, unless anyone else wants to add. So for transit through the UK via air shipments, will you need to recheck secure cargo shipments already pre-checked by regulated agents? I suppose that's, yeah.
No, so the ruling is that only for road freight. So road freight by truck moving from the UK to Europe is not recognized. So if you are doing a transfer, F freight to F freight, it is recognized.
Okay, great.
We don't have that many, but if there was to be a transfer, F freight shipment, it would be recognized. Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so that sums up the questions we had. I know Antonio from Arteria wants to add another anecdote to the discussion here as well.
Yes, thank you, John. A couple of issues about Italian loans going to UK or coming back. We, for these past 4 years, we always had the same question from UK museum or from Italian museum. Will we be able to return loans that are in Italy going back to UK without any problems or customs problems? And the Italian museum were asking the same. Will we be able to have back our loans, in the middle and in the moment of the starting of the Brexit? There was exhibition, not many because of COVID, but there were exhibition opened in October in UK, and the Italian loans coming back. So we had one case right in these days, both ways. One UK loan in Italy was going back to England, to London, and the Italian loans are coming back to Italy tomorrow. So it was easy at the end. There were no issues with customs, because normally you have just to present to custom the transport paper, because we do not have an export, when returning back. There were no custom paper before. So we just need to make an application to the custom, very easy, declaring why these Italian loans were in England, what kind of exhibition, and a copy of the transport document that was used in October in this case. And they are coming back to Italy without any issue with import customs duties, because that would be the case in the future if you do not have that kind of papers. So at the moment, it's quite easy to return loans from Europe or from England without any issues. From now on, the new loans need to have custom papers both ways. So that was not a problem. And also I wanted to say that there are no real problems for Italian loans going to UK regarding the export fine art license, because Italy was always requiring an export fine art license, even before, even if, between European European countries. So this is not changing. It's a different form, but the procedure is the same. There is no delay, so that will happen like usual. And the same for traveling exhibition going from one or the European country to UK. I don't think I want to ask confirmation to Francesco Simon. This is not really changing, because the transfer of an exhibition from between the European countries anyway mean that you have to make a custom document transferring the exhibition to another country. It was never a free circulation because of the import duties and customs guarantee. There was always need to make the transfer document custom between Italy and UK before, and now would be the same. So this is not changing or affecting for our side in Italy any new problem because of Brexit. I don't know, Francesco, is the same for your side?
Yeah, no, absolutely the same. Yeah, there's no issue in transferring an exhibition. Obviously, I mean, yes, of course, if it was all European loans before Brexit, we didn't have to worry. But of course, with works from outside Europe, yeah, it will be the same. We still have to do an entry, a transfer entry. Yeah.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Elizabeth is going to offer another anecdote as well from Denmark.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had a truck the third week in January. We hooked from Holland with ferry to Harwich. And like always, preparation is really important. But a thing we learned was that it seems there are new customs office codes for some of the ports in the UK. And apparently our local Danish system was not updated yet. So we actually got stuck for a few hours at Harwich at the customs, because we already had the customs papers issued to Harwich, but with the wrong number. By the help of our agents, we were able to move on. But it was important for us to go back to our local system and say, look, there's a change here. You need to update it after 1st of January. So might be a good advice for each country to just double check that the customs office numbers are still valid and the same. And another thing we also learned is that, yes, we've been used to customs before and the time that it takes, but now we always have to think about an extra stop. So now it's either at the customs office or at the agent's warehouse, as Francesco was telling about. And it's just worth taking that into account when planning and scheduling the trip and the transport, because even though it might only be 30 minutes or an hour, it's just adding up. And right now we also, on top of that, have to provide corona testing, a negative test, before going, at least for the ferry. And the drivers have to find a place to get that done before they can enter the border again. and that was about 2 hours. So all in that, it just takes more time, and you have to take that into account. And also the whole thing about either closing or starting the custom papers at the agents' warehouses, that's a big advantage. We also had a situation where we had to start and stop at a normal customs office. It didn't take long, but all these new registrations we have to do in the systems, we have to do before the truck leaves UK. And that meant the ferry leaves at 11 o'clock at night. So we had to sit at night before we would have to wait to get the custom papers and then enter it in the ferry system. So there's we're learning as it goes, and it went well, but it takes a bit more preparation and timing. And of course, the more we do it, the more we get used to it, the easier it will go. And I will say it's been a great help with all the agents in the UK. Everyone's been very helpful explaining DMR codes, what we need to register and how to do it. So that's been a big help that we can help each other out that way.
Thank you so much. All right, we have one more final question from our chat here. What is the timeline for upper deck shipments from the US en route to the UK via the EU? The cargo has to be imported into the EU and then exported from the EU into the UK via truck or ferry. Is that correct?
Well, if I may answer and reassure all our friends in the States that really we don't expect any changes, for that kind of shipment, because we, before Brexit, we had to do exactly that. At the first port of entry in Europe, the agent appointed would issue a transit document to the UK, so that is not going to change. So I don't expect any changes to what was before Brexit at all. Again, Marco maybe can add to that, but if we had a shipment arriving, say, Amsterdam, transferring to the UK,
it's the same. Yeah, it's not going to make a difference.
It doesn't matter, even in Belgium as well?
Correct.
Great. That's reassuring. All right, someone's just sneaking the last one in here. All right, I promise this is the last one. Can you say anything about the likelihood of object crates being opened as part of the customs checks?
I mean, again, customs have got the right and authorities to check and potentially open crates. There was a pre-Brexit as well. Again, it's a possibility, but it's I mean, in my experience, I think it might have happened once or twice in almost 30 years.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think Francesca is absolutely right. It's important to remember that they've always had that that authority to do that, but it didn't happen very often. I suppose you could count it in among the possible outcomes in this initial period, I suppose, as people are trying to find their way through the procedures, I guess, or how rigorous the procedures are going to be applied on a given port and by a given officer.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's a great place to leave the discussion. Obviously, this is a very fluid topic, and it's still evolving. So we appreciate all the information so far and the shared experiences. Thank you so much to our panel, Francesco, Antonio, Elizabeth, David, Jen, Simon, Anna, and Marco. And thanks everybody for listening. Again, I can't emphasize enough, there's more regular information updated basically daily on the fortheloveofart.info website. Also, please hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel so that you get updates whenever we go live and whenever we upload a new video. Again, there's more there than just these live topics, so these live chats. So with that, we're gonna leave you all until the next discussion, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Bye.
Ciao, bye-bye.